Laura woke up to find her pool destroyed, and it wasn't an accident. The HOA had ordered it with no warning, no consent. As she dug deeper, she uncovered a web of corruption hiding behind the rules. What happened next will shock even the most cynical. But let's start from the beginning. Laura Reynolds had always viewed her backyard as a sanctuary, a place of peace where she could let go of the stress that came with raising two kids on her own. The pool, a beautiful, crystal-clear oasis that her late husband had installed, was more than just a luxury. It was a legacy, something that connected her to the past, to memories of better days, and offered her a small slice of tranquility in an increasingly chaotic world. But when Laura stepped outside one fateful morning, she was met with an undeniable truth. Her sanctuary was gone. The pool, once the crown jewel of her backyard, had been torn apart. The concrete and tile that once gleamed under the sun now lay in piles of rubble and twisted metal. The water that had once shimmered in the sunlight was replaced by a vast emptiness. The first thought that crossed her mind was that it had to be some sort of mistake, maybe a construction error or an accidental mishap. But as she approached the scene, a sinking feeling gnawed at her stomach. This destruction was too deliberate, too thorough to be anything but intentional. It wasn't long before the cold reality set in. On her doorstep lay a letter from the HOA, its logo printed in bold at the top. The words inside were sharp and clinical, informing her that the demolition had been carried out due to non-compliance with newly enforced regulations regarding backyard structures. A wave of disbelief hit her as she read the letter. How could this happen? She had always adhered to every rule, every guideline the HOA laid out. There had never been any mention of these so-called new regulations. Not in the numerous meetings she'd attended, not in any of the newsletters she'd received. This felt like a betrayal. Her eyes scanned the letter again, each word growing more infuriating than the last. The HOA had not only made this decision without her knowledge, but they'd also executed it without any prior warning, any opportunity for her to address the situation. This wasn't just about the pool. It was about her autonomy, her ability to make decisions about her own property. And the more Laura thought about it, the more the feeling of injustice boiled inside her. This was something deeper, something more sinister than just a misunderstood regulation. Someone, somewhere, had made a decision that would change her life, and she intended to find out who. Laura's anger simmered as she walked into the HOA office. She had hoped for some clarity, some explanation that might justify the destruction of her beloved pool. Instead, she was met with a wall of indifference. The woman behind the counter barely glanced up as Laura laid the letter down in front of her. "The decision has been made," the woman said flatly. "The pool didn't meet our updated aesthetic standards." Laura's head spun. Aesthetic standards? Her backyard had always been impeccably maintained, lush, well-kept, and with the pool as its centerpiece, blending seamlessly into the serene landscape. She had spent years cultivating this place, investing time, money, and effort to ensure it was perfect. But the HOA's response was cold, dismissive. She pressed for answers, but it quickly became clear that what had happened to her wasn't an isolated case. The HOA, it seemed, had been slowly tightening its grip on the neighborhood, pushing through stricter and more unreasonable rules under the guise of improving the area's appearance. Laura's stomach twisted. It wasn't just her pool they had targeted. There were whispers of other homeowners receiving similar notices, properties being altered or demolished without consent. But there was something more sinister at play here. The HOA wasn't just enforcing rules. They were selectively punishing people who didn't conform to their vision of what the neighborhood should look like. And Laura, for whatever reason, had become their latest target. "They said it didn't match the neighborhood's visual aesthetic," she muttered to herself, the words tasting bitter. "But it was perfect. It was just fine." That's when it hit her. This wasn't about aesthetics. It was about control, about the HOA asserting its dominance, forcing residents to comply without question. And Laura wasn't going to stand for it. Fury coursed through her veins, but so did something else, a cold, determined resolve. She couldn't let them get away with this. She would fight back. She began researching her rights, learning everything she could about homeowners' laws. She contacted a lawyer, gathered every scrap of evidence she could find that pointed to the HOA's unlawful actions. They had crossed a line, and now she would make them answer for it. The fight for justice proved to be far more complex and daunting than Laura had ever imagined. The HOA, with its vast resources, was a formidable opponent. Their legal team was not only well-funded but deeply entrenched in the community, with connections that stretched far beyond what Laura had anticipated. Her case was far from a simple neighborhood dispute. It had become a battle against a powerful, tightly knit system that seemed untouchable. As the media began to cover the story, Laura found herself thrust into the public spotlight. While some sympathetic voices rallied behind her, there was also a strong backlash. Critics painted her as nothing more than a disgruntled homeowner who couldn't accept the rules. Was she just trying to protect a swimming pool? They wondered. Why not just follow the rules like everyone else? To many, she was no more than a nuisance, a symbol of petty defiance against the greater good. But Laura refused to let the scrutiny derail her. She had already lost too much to back down now. And then, just as the trial date loomed closer, she stumbled upon something that would change everything. During a routine search through HOA records, she uncovered a web of corruption that went far beyond a single pool demolition. It started with a handful of seemingly small discrepancies, unusual contractor bids, inflated invoices, and approvals for projects that seemed to be more about money than any actual improvement to the neighborhood. But as she dug deeper, the picture became clearer. The HOA was involved in secret illegal deals with contractors, kickbacks in exchange for approving certain projects. The deeper she went, the more she realized the extent of the corruption. They had been targeting homeowners they disliked or who didn't conform to their standards, and making decisions based on personal vendettas rather than community welfare. Laura's case had never been just about her pool. It was now a matter of exposing this toxic, corrupt system and holding those responsible to account. She could see the pieces fall into place, and she knew she had uncovered something far bigger than herself. The battle had shifted. Now it was about justice, not just for her, but for everyone who had ever been victimized by the HOA's abuse of power. The day of the trial arrived. The courtroom was tense, and Laura felt the weight of the battle bearing down on her. But when the truth came out, everything changed. The HOA's president was caught lying under oath, and the evidence of the shady dealings was too much to ignore. In a dramatic turn of events, the judge ruled in Laura's favor. Not only did she win the lawsuit, but she was awarded far more compensation than she had expected, including punitive damages for the emotional distress caused by the HOA's actions. As the gavel came down, Laura felt an overwhelming sense of triumph. Justice had been served, and the corrupt HOA was forced to overhaul its practices. As the case ended, Laura stood in the courthouse, a symbol of perseverance in the face of adversity. Her victory wasn't just about a pool. It was a victory against injustice, a reminder that sometimes the little guy can win.